Good day. My name is Max Reiboldt. I'm President, CEO of Coker Group, a national healthcare advisory firm. And today we're engaging a two-part presentation. The first part will be, or both parts will be covering urology leadership and new generations. And we're honored to be able to participate in this presentation for the Urology Grand Rounds. Our table of contents includes both parts, and today, as I said, we'll focus on part one. Let's get right into the discussion. And essentially what we want to cover today and put it in the perspective of urologists and their specialty and their makeup as it relates to generational gaps and generational descriptions. I'm sure all of us have heard about the various generations as they've been named and designated. This particular slide illustrates the point, and today we have three active generations in existence in our society. We have the baby boomers. I happen to be a member of that generation. We have the Gen Xers, and indeed, we have the millennials. So let's drill down just a little bit on how those generations might differ and then put it in the context of urologists and practicing the specialty of urology. First of all, there is a very different mindset between the three generations. Again, in this slide, we've tried to illustrate exactly when they began and when they, the course of their existence. Baby boomers are retiring, and they're retiring at an accelerated rate, estimated at 10,000 per day. Now, that's not just, needless to say, in healthcare or urology, it's throughout our country. Younger generations, such as the next gen and the millennials, are now assuming leadership roles in practices, in urology, specializations, etc. So understanding these generational differences is imperative because there is a dramatic change in the way they look, the way they operate, the way they think between the three generations. As we look at this and get even more specific related to urology professional makeup and the practice makeup, we found some interesting statistics as we prepared for this presentation. First of all, about half, actually a little bit more than half of the practicing urologists today are baby boomers. About 43% are Gen X, and a very small percentage, because of their youth still, are millennials. About 90% of the practicing urologists are male. No surprise there, given the specialty. However, an increasing number of those Gen X females are entering the workforce and are becoming female practicing urologists. A very important point to note, not only because of their being female and some difference of thinking and the way they complete their work, but also because of the generational change. A majority of the practicing urologists are in private practice still, an interesting dynamic. Our firm works a lot with practices throughout the country and health systems in transactional activity. We do employment, PSA, and other related deals. And indeed, still most of the urologists are private, but that is probably going to change. And one of the reasons it's going to change is because these new generations are much more amicable toward being employed by a health system or part of a larger group or doing a private equity transaction. Salaried employment becomes typically comes with lack of control and flexibility, but again, the newer generations don't consider that to be as important as the quality of life and some of the other factors that we actually encounter. Let's drill down just a little bit more, and then we'll end this presentation on these three generational descriptions. The baby boomers, first of all, needless to say, are older. One would think, are more emotionally mature. They've kind of been there and done that. They're nearing the end of their career. Generally speaking, they have a very strong work ethic. They're very competitive, and they work long hours. They're dedicated, loyal, and committed to their organization, their employer. Now, that is not to say, as you'll see in a moment, that the others are not, but they have just a different way of showing it, and their priorities are a little different, perhaps. Baby boomers tend to carry the live to work philosophy, like work is really their life, whereas other generations consider work to be very important, but not their life. Baby boomers are also more authoritative in their management structure. The Gen X, the Generation X individuals, take a different approach, but they're much more versed on wealth building, and it was affected by the 2008 recession. Now, one thing I want to say right off, we don't have any statistics yet post-COVID. We're not even through post-COVID as it relates to many places, but it will be interesting to see if some of these attitudes change as a result of that. And we'll be back, if you want us to look at that down the road. Generation X people are commonly referred as latchkey kids due to their self-sufficiency as they were growing up. Both parents tend to work as those Generation X people grew up. Whereas in my generation, the baby boomers, that was not common. And believe me, that affected us in the way we work and the way we think. And it truly has an effect on the practice of urology. Generation X individuals are always up for a new challenge. Sometimes it's hard for them to stay as focused on a long-term, steady career position. They're looking to adapt to change, and technology has been a big part of their life pretty much from their childhood, although maybe towards the latter part of their childhood in this case. They favor the working to live philosophy. And again, there's a subtle difference there between the Generation X and the baby boomers. When we get to the millennials here in a second, you'll see even a more dramatic change. They like direct and unfiltered management styles. So as opposed to the authoritative one, they want to understand and know the management style, but they don't have to be quite as authoritative in that regard. So let's look at millennials. What are they like? Well, millennials, which is a very small percentage, as I indicated to you earlier, of the urologists practicing in the United States today, but when they become a little bit older and they start to assume more leadership roles, we're going to really have to adapt a great deal more to their style and what they grew up with. And interestingly enough, they're fastly becoming the holders of the greatest amount of wealth in the United States. They don't have it yet, but clearly by the year 2030, just 10 short years away, they will. So we're going to have to be ready for that. Millennials want more instant gratification and feedback. They live and grew up in the era of emails and text and Instagram and Facebook and so forth, social media. Very quick, very short, and to the point. And that's what they like. Whereas the baby boomers and even the Generation Xers are not as much that way. Certainly the baby boomers are not. We prefer to communicate face-to-face, by telephone. Clearly we use emails, but not as much. Back to the millennials, they seek mentorship and encouragement. But they also have a great work-life balance, many cases much better than our baby boomers do. They're diverse. Gender is somewhat equal in terms of representation. Ethnicity, of course, is becoming more common across various ethnicities. And even within urology, I think we'll see more and more females. We'll see more African American, more Asians, Native American, etc. It's going to become much more of a balance. And income backgrounds will be similar as well. Technology is a big deal to millennials. It probably drives their entire being more than the other two generations put together, for sure. So we'll see more and more of that. How will millennial physicians react? Well, that'll be an interesting discussion and observation. Typically, they're going to reflect some of these same things like new and faster systems to make patient care more efficient. They'll be much more receptive, for example, to telemedicine, even in the urology setting, than their predecessors were. Also, millennials are not ones for great formality. It will be very rare, if ever, for example, that you see a urologist who has a male urologist in the future who's a millennial that'll be wearing a coat and tie. Maybe not even a lab coat as such. It's just not as big a deal to them. They grew up in a very different environment. So as we complete this first part of our session, it's important to realize that there are some very distinctive differences between these generations, and needless to say, they spill over into and are a part of the specialty of urologists. Now, soon we'll talk about part two, and we'll drill down just a little bit more on this subject. Thank you.